If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Lone Lightworker podcast. I'm your host, Jen Rodriguez. I'd like to thank you all for returning and for joining me here for today's episode of the Lone Lightworker. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to subscribe to the Lone Lightworker podcast on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcast, or whichever podcast platform you use. I would also like to invite you to join the Lone Lightworker communities on Facebook and Instagram. Before we get started with today's episode, I'd like to thank everyone for all the positive feedback and the outpouring of love from last week's episode, Reset Button. The feedback and support have been overwhelming in a good way, and I'm so thrilled and so excited to be back here for our second episode, Get Over It. But first, huge shout out to some of my supporters who have helped to spread the word about the Lone Lightworker podcast. Please keep spreading the word and sharing the love out there, guys. I can't do this without each of you, and I truly appreciate the love and the support from each and every one of you. In today's episode of The Lone Lightworker, we're going to go back to a time and place where we found ourselves stuck or struggling with getting over something. It could be the failed relationship you experienced and are having a difficult time moving past. It might be a mistake made that you're having a difficult time forgiving yourself or someone else for. Or it could be about the time someone did you wrong that you just haven't been able to forgive. It's that situation that you think maybe you've resolved, only to have every emotion flood right back in the minute someone mentions it. The truth is, we've all had experiences that have been difficult to get past for one reason or another, making it really hard for us to move on. So why in the heck is it so difficult for us to move on and move forward? We might be here all weekend if we try to look at every possible reason. So we're going to just take a look at some of the most common ones. I'm going to start us off with one that I know all too well, ego. Good old pride getting in our way. SimpleMindfulness.com says that letting go can be hard because it means letting go of aspects of your past, aspects of you. It also means letting go of your expectations of how things should have been. Letting go stings a little because we feel like it suggests that we were in the wrong or that we were the ones who messed up. And who here ever enjoys hearing about how we really messed something up? That rarely feels good to anyone. I know it doesn't feel good to me. And add to that any feelings that the other person was actually the one in the wrong, and forget it. We do not want to give any indication that it was our fault or that we were the jerks in the situation. But we'd be wise to remember that that is all in the past and we can't go back and undo what's already been done. SimpleMindfulness.com reminds us that the drama and the holding on is all in our heads, and we're the only ones who have the power to let it go. Another big one is control. Letting go usually means stepping out into the unknown, and that in itself can be really hard for us humans. Tony Robbins stated that letting go means having the courage to let go of what's familiar, even if it's negative, and being vulnerable enough to embrace and learn from what's ahead. When we're stepping out into the unknown, we lose some sense of control over ourselves or over our lives, and that can be scary. How many marriages have we heard about where the love and the passion had been long lost, but the couple stayed in the marriage because it was comfortable, it was convenient, It's what they've known, and to them, it's better than having to step out into a new world, into uncharted territory. It's safe, and they're in control, and they choose to stay, even though the marriage isn't as fulfilling as it once was to them. In other instances, the minute we feel like we're losing control, we tighten our grip that much more, rather than being real with ourselves that it's over. I remember having a conversation with a friend and coworker of mine several years ago. She and her husband were not happy. They had been through marriage counseling. They had tried everything that they knew to try. And while they definitely had love for each other, they were no longer in love. Yet they both chose to stay in the marriage for several years, and their reasons were because they thought it best for their children at the time. It also worked best financially for them. But what she also shared that really stood out to me was she was afraid. Fear is another big reason we fear the unknown. That marriage and the life they created together was familiar and safe to them. They knew what to expect, and they knew where they stood with each other. It wasn't until years later that they finally realized that, yes, while it was safe and predictable, it wasn't fulfilling, and it wasn't a compromise that they were willing to make any longer. So they moved on and away from each other, and they decided it was time to embrace that fear. They're still amazing friends, and they're actually both remarried, and they're all happily co-parenting together now. Besides the fear of the unknown, there's also the fear of judgment or criticism. There's the fear of hurt or additional heartache. There's a lot to fear if we allow it. Another one topping the list is guilt. How many times have you wanted so badly to move on and heal from a situation or someone, and every time you thought you had finally made peace with it, those creepy crawlers, those guilty feelings crawled right back in? For me, as someone in recovery, I had a lot of guilt about the years and memories that I felt I had missed out on. Mind you, I was always there physically, but I wasn't fully present, and I beat myself up for that for a long time. I thought over and over, I will never get that time back. And my guilt kept me stuck in this never-ending cycle of self-loathing and destructive thoughts. Another extremely common reason is love, or rather a misunderstanding of love. Just because they no longer love us doesn't mean our love just instantaneously stops. They no longer want to be with us, but we just don't know how to let it go. Or maybe it's a scenario of us needing to recognize that their love is not the way in which we need and want to be loved. Think about when someone loved you, or someone you loved didn't treat you and love you the way that you wanted to be treated or loved. Some of us settle for whatever it is that they're giving us, even though we know deep down that we deserve more. We deserve something other than what it is they're giving us. Maybe it has to do with our own dysfunctional upbringing and the type of love modeled for us as we were growing up, or maybe it's something completely unrelated. But the bottom line is, sometimes love makes it hard to let go. So we've looked at a few of the top reasons that it can be so hard. But what now? Well, before we go any further, I need to let you in on a little secret. There is no magic answer. There is no magic solution that will instantly change the script. It's important for us to realize that it will take time, it will take work, and it's going to take practice, but it will get easier. It became extremely clear that regardless of the specific reason in any given situation, there are emotions and feelings ultimately needing to be addressed. Whether it's the shame holding you back, or the low self-esteem convincing you that this is all that you deserve, we have to address the feelings and the emotions associated with the situation if we're ever going to truly move on from it. As I had mentioned before, the guilt and shame I felt as a recovering addict, it tied me down and it kept me from being able to move on. I had to get down and dirty and address the shame that I felt. Another big step in the healing process is learning to forgive. And I mean genuine, wholehearted forgiveness. Sure, I've forgiven someone when they asked for it and when they apologized for their actions. I said, I forgive you. And I really wanted to forgive them. I just wasn't really working through the emotions and feelings that I needed to in order to actually and fully get to a place of forgiveness. So then I was in this weird, unbalanced state of reminding myself that I had forgiven them one minute, and the next minute, those feelings of anger or hurt were right there in my face again. That was not a fun space to be in, but that space helped me realize that I wasn't truly acknowledging or addressing the feelings that were there. So I got real with myself, and I got to work on identifying each emotion I was feeling. And then from there, I worked to figure out why I was ultimately feeling that way. You know what I figured out time and again? I discovered that in many cases, it was actually something much deeper, maybe a childhood experience, feelings from past experiences that I had never fully explored or even recognized. And you know what? I realized in a lot of those cases, it really wasn't about the friend who left me out. It was about the fact that I had felt left out of things from a very early age. And it was unfortunately this person or this experience that brought up those old feelings that I didn't even know I had. That in itself helped me to shift the focus from this person to another more productive place, the underlying issues and feelings. Before we can move on from it, we have to feel it all. And we have to understand where and why those feelings exist in the first place. Once we've identified and explored the different feelings and ultimately the reason or cause of those feelings, we need to work to shift our perceptions and our beliefs. I worked on shifting my perception so that I was and am no longer a victim. By shifting my perception and my perspective, I went from being a wounded victim to a brave warrior princess. And just by changing my thoughts, my words and my feelings also started to shift. In addition to changing my perception, I also took a closer look at what I could and would take responsibility for in each of those situations. I took some control back by taking responsibility for my part. I am determined to live a life that is focused on bettering myself, practicing forgiveness and love with myself first and foremost. We have to make a conscious and dedicated effort to let go and move on. And sometimes that has to be a conscious decision that we make every single day. One thing that I wanted to be sure to touch on today is the tendency that so many of us have, the woulda, coulda, shoulda trap. Don't do that. It does absolutely no good doing that dance. If you can't actually go back and change it, there's no point in dwelling on the what ifs. The minute you find yourself going there, stop and remind yourself that it's not helpful, it's not healthy, and it's not going to change a darn thing. Instead, ask yourself, what did I learn from this? And spend your time and energy on identifying those lessons, rather than dreaming about how things could have been if you had just done this or that. Another helpful approach is to imagine yourself in the other person's shoes. There have been many times where I initially responded in one way, but after considering what or how it may have felt for the other person, it helped to soften my heart a bit. Imagine if we all made it common practice to consider the other person's perspective, and at an absolute minimum, we gave them the benefit of the doubt. Instead of jumping right to the conclusion that they left me out because they don't like me, perhaps it's merely because my friend Betty had just finished working a 16-hour day, and honestly, she just forgot. And sometimes we just need to accept that the other person may never end up giving us the apology that we feel we deserve. Maybe it's because they aren't sorry. Maybe it's because they aren't sure how to apologize. Maybe it's because they don't care enough to do it. Regardless of the why, sometimes that apology just doesn't come, and we need to get to a place where we're just as healed and just as happy either way. It starts within us and remains with us. Nobody but you is responsible for your happiness. For me, in those cases where the apologies never came, I chose instead to explore why that person's apology was so important to me. After spending a lot of time searching my heart for these answers, I realized that a lot of it has to do with my ego. If I can apologize for certain things or behaviors, well, so should they. I had to acknowledge and admit to the fact that I am in no place to dictate how others feel or behave, unless it's my children. Who am I to expect that from others? I'm not saying that you should sit around accepting any and all bad behavior from other people. I'm merely saying that just because you feel that an apology or certain behavior is appropriate in a situation, that doesn't mean that it is, and it certainly doesn't mean that that's what you're going to get. Everyone is different, everyone is unique, and we're all at various points in our journeys, and I try to remind myself of this regularly. It makes us no better and no worse than anyone else, and that's what we could all use a little reminder of from time to time. We are all beautiful creatures, finding our way in this sometimes hard and fast world. We have all been hurt, and we have all hurt others at one point or another. We have all experienced pain, and will experience it again in the course of our lifetime. What's important is that we learn and grow along the way, and that we get a little better each time at making peace and moving on as we go. With that, I thank you for listening today, and I look forward to meeting you back here next week for an all-new episode of The Lone Lightworker. Until then, keep shining your light and keep spreading